Here's a notable bad game that I won't hear a single bad word said against. It's Doom. Of course, it's not just any old version of Doom, but Doom on the SNES. Now, most people can take one look at this game and say, geez, what was the point of it? An experiment to show just how bad Doom would run on a 16-bit console, kicked out in stores for 80 quid a pop? You could talk about many things. The botched sound effects, the stripped apart levels suddenly bereft of enemies, the single digit frame rate and comically low resolution. But I don't want to talk about any of that. Instead, I want to talk about owning an Amiga in 1995. Now, the Amiga's last days were very up and down, particularly for a late adopter like me who didn't get their A1200 until Christmas in 1994. On the good side, there's a huge library of great games and most of them are cheap. There's still a few good games to come and it's a damn fine computer in any case. On the bad side, well, where's Doom? Now, this channel is often dedicated to the European perspective, where certain things could be markedly different from what is often perceived to be the norm worldwide. For example, Nintendo not being the top dogs over here. In the case of Doom, I don't have to do that. People here were crazy for Doom just as they were everywhere else. Come the end of 1993, when magazines finally got around to reviewing it and dishing out the customary high 90s, it was pretty clearly the game to end all games. There had been nothing like it before and somehow, one way or another, you had to play it. Drop all this microcomputer bollocks if you're still into it, sell a kidney, buy a PC and get yourself some Doom, because that's the only way you're going to be able to do it. But us Amiga folk are nothing if not hard-headed, and so we waited for news. Surely Doom was going to arrive on the Amiga before too long. How could the king of all computers just be ignored? But no. What we couldn't see is that by the time Doom became a phenomenon around 93-94, the Amiga was already slowly dying. Commodore itself was soon to be dead if they weren't already, the computer was in a lengthy limbo that it would never get out of, and with no new computers on the horizon, studios were gradually leaving the Amiga behind. id Software themselves had no interest in putting Doom on the Amiga. Hell, they were Americans and the Amiga as a commercial computer had already been dead for years over there, so why the hell would they? That was the sad truth. But of course we couldn't see that, we wouldn't listen, and so there were two questions that Amiga mags received in their thousands in every month's mailbag back in 95. How do I get the internet on an Amiga? And will we ever see Doom on the Amiga? For the latter, well, mags probably wouldn't want us to see the truth on that one either, if they themselves were even able to face up to it. Gotta keep the hype up somehow, otherwise what'll happen to the already dwindling circulation? In the absence of Doom, several tried to offer alternatives: Alien Breed 3D 1 and 2, Gloom, Breathless, various others, and they were noble and often really freaking good on their own merits, but obviously they lacked the name or, by the stage they came out, the audience. Doom would eventually see an Amiga port, but not until 1998 when multiple versions came out after the release of the original source code. Hell, you can play Doom on just about anything these days, but not on the Amiga in 1995. But then, for those of us who couldn't experience the game on PC as intended, there was a slight form of salvation, and it lay in this game, this much knocked and in hindsight clearly poor port of Doom for the SNES. Maybe some people had this experience on the 32X too, or the Jaguar, or any other machine that received these quite bad ports, who knows. And yes, it's not very good. Playing it for this video for the first time in over a decade, I certainly recognise how unresponsive the controls are, how slow the game is, how the resolution turns everything into a massive mess of pixels. The music is still kicking, mind you, but clearly Doom is too much for the SNES to handle, a ludicrous overreach. But back then, for those like me who weren't able to get the PC version yet, it was something. A chance to bask a little in the glory of the game that everyone else was talking about, and perhaps the last big cry of the port that isn't anywhere close to the original, but manages to get something of its essence. And somehow, once I readjust to the game's crap factor, even knowing that I have the option of playing HD resolution versions of the original to hand, I can still feel that a little bit in Williams' stupidly ambitious port. Of course it was hideously expensive, so I never actually bought it, but whenever I could I would rent it and play it to death. It was a sliver, a taste of things to come. Soon enough you would be able to play Doom as intended. Until then, this would do. SNES Doom may not be a good game, but it is a strong game in memory. Now, soon enough didn't come until 1997, when the family finally got a cheapish second-hand PC. A couple of years old by that point, not all that good in the first place, ostensibly for office work and no internet. But yes, it could run Doom. I don't even remember how we actually ended up with Doom 2, whether someone bought it or more likely a friend had a copy and installed it or whatever. But finally it was there, and after all the years of hype, it was everything that I thought it would be and more. The quest for true Doom was over. A couple of years after that I managed to find a Doom 95 box at a boot sale with both Doom 1 and 2 and Final Doom on it. And well, that was definitely it by then. Played for hours, many hours, all the original episodes, all the WODs I could find on the internet, everything. Still replayed every now and again as a true classic should be. As ubiquitous, famous, and indeed maybe surpassed as it is, Doom 1 and 2 remains my all-time favourite first-person shooter. Doom 2 in particular holds such a special place in my heart as one of the greatest sequels ever, and one of the most intense and flat-out scary games I have ever played. It's perfect. Few games are tough in the way that Doom 2 is, when you always feel like you're just scraping for a stage, when you just about manage to kill that heavy weapons dude with a bullet and a sliver of health to spare, when you reach the exit only to find a pair of Caker demons coming for you, when almost any mob is a potential threat due to just how much damage you take, and you can barely see a bloody fin most of the time. There's many times in Doom 2 where you just feel like you're utterly screwed, when you're just about to open a new door with virtually no ammo and the desperate, bloodied face of your marine is twitching with dread. If you're lucky, there's just a shotgun guy behind that door. Maybe there'll be a few imps, perhaps a chain gunner if you're quite unlucky, possibly a Hell Knight if you're just completely unlucky. Pause, deep breath, go. Sometimes you die and you have to restart the level from the beginning. But when you survive, there's nothing quite like it. My first proper PC gaming experience, and it couldn't have been much better. Doom on the SNES was a taster, but this was the real deal, the full-blown dose. One of my favourite games of all time. And so we basically jump forward almost 20 years. Doom 3 isn't really part of the equation, because I've never played it. The PC I had at the time wasn't nearly strong enough to run it, and by the time I had a PC that was strong enough, I wasn't really interested in it. From all I'd heard, the game didn't really play much like the Doom I knew, so rightly or most likely wrongly, I never touched it. So these days it's just another entry in a big old backlog. Again, Doom seemed to fade away a little, obviously never into total obscurity, but it was more like the Monty Python's Flying Circus of first-person shooters, the one that was massively influential but had surely been surpassed by better models many times over. That was usually the consensus. Make sure you play it for the history value. But, you know, modern games are so much more immersive and better with so much more to do and shit. That seemed to be the general opinion anyway, although hardly mine. I always thought it was great to play regardless of anything. Judging by some more recent games though, I wasn't alone in that. Before we get to the new Doom, we kinda need to think about the best way to look at it, to build up to it. It would be easy to say that the new Doom represents a glorious return to all the things that old FPS games represented. The big arenas, rejecting cutscenes and cover mechanics, theatrical splashes of blood, ridiculous weapons and so on. In a way, this is how you can take Doom 2016 and be happy with it, and such an approach does fit in with how successful the game was. But it also does the game a bit of a disservice, as it's a lot more complex than that. Title aside, Doom is a very modern game that represents a changing of the guard. But it's also the start of another chapter in a decade or more's fighting over what best represents the FPS as a genre. And going through all of those gimmicks and trends would obviously take an age and would take us way past the point of this video and beyond. It's easier to sum up the newer games that represented the old ways, so to speak, before Doom 2016 and see how they fared. 2011's Bulletstorm is one of Doom's closest relations in play, because it encourages you to play very fast and with as much of a flourish as you can. You get so much more out of the game when you're running around, dodging bullets and putting combos together. You get so many tools that are based around sliding into enemies, kicking them forward into barrels, shooting them and taking out a whole mob in the ensuing explosion. That's the game basically. It rewards flair, variation, style and above all, risk-taking. This style of play was completely off trend at the time though, and a lot of people instead played Bulletstorm more like one of many cover-based shooters that were around back then. It didn't go far enough as it still kind of had those options to hand. At the time it reviewed very badly and sank like a stone. But over the years it has gained a cult following, to the point where Bulletstorm, a game that flopped hard, is getting a remastered edition this year, something that's usually only bestowed on the likes of The Last of Us or Bioshock, the biggest games of the last generation. In the same year, Duke Nukem Forever, another representative of the old school, came out. And yeah, we know how that went. A disastrous flop, an examination of just what over 10 years of overspend, feature creep, studio problems and just plain bad luck can do to a once loved game that now simply didn't have a clue what it was supposed to be. It was quite deservedly shunned. The one positive about the resurfacing and capitulation of Duke Nukem Forever was that it opened up a path for some of Duke Nukem's contemporaries to get back into the action, on the grounds that they could probably do a better job, which indeed they did. 2013's Rise of the Triad is a pretty straight-ahead remake of Apogee's 1994 classic with very little changes to the mechanics. The gameplay is much the same, the health systems and whatnot are much the same, the first-person platforming, naturally, is the same, and the presentation is obviously updated but still similar aesthetically. Not a massive game by any means, but a lot better than Duke Nukem Forever. This game is a very proud throwback that shuns just about everything that happened in the FPS genre after the release of the original Rise of the Triad. The same though cannot be said for another game that released in 2013 and featured a member of the old guard. Shadow Warrior does do those basic old school things, covers a dirty word here, as is anything that potentially makes the game slow down, but it's a totally new game, one where it's infinitely more fun than it was before to simply slice and dice with the sword. And like Bulletstorm, it rewards you for how well you fight and how varied your attacks are. It's a pretty freaking good game all told. A successful one too, meaning that all of a sudden Shadow Warrior, a game that was, to be honest, just one of many build engine FPSs in the late 90s, is now a big name in the FPS genre in a way that it wasn't even when it came out originally. Of course, another thing that can't be forgotten in all of this is the Doom scene itself. People have been making levels, episodes, total conversions of Doom in their thousands since 1994, and they're never likely to stop. The release of the source code for Doom means that no matter what, there will likely always be a very easy way for modern computers and operating systems to play Doom, thanks to source ports like ZDoom. Even if you've somehow never played the original Doom before, it's very easy to do so in thoroughly ass-kicking Full HD, no DOSBox required. And every now and again, a mod comes out of the scene to receive plenty of attention. 2010's Brutal Doom is a good example of that. A game that's basically the original but with revamped enemies and weapons, a whole shit ton more blood, plenty of executions, and the ability to tell cyberdemons to go fuck themselves. The mod received a lot of praise at the time, and did have long admitted that they were looking at the likes of Brutal Doom for inspiration when creating the new game. And then at last you have the return of Wolfenstein, a series that had had its own ups and downs over the years. Following the success of its first reboot, Return to Castle Wolfenstein, 8 years passed between it and 2009's second reboot, simply called Wolfenstein. A game that had its ups and downs, was seen as a bit of old hat, didn't sell well at all, and resulted in the gutting of long-timed collaborators Raven Software. But another few years pass, it'd pair up with a new company called Machine Games, and in 2014 they release Wolfenstein The New Order. And shock of horrors, it's bloody brilliant. Modern as all hell, but it's got that old school vibe. Big bosses, lots of enemies, tons of firepower, tons of movement, secrets. It feels like you would expect a modern Wolfenstein game too, and it actually ends up selling pretty well in the bargain. It is certainly appropriate that a new Wolfenstein game comes around just before the release of a new Doom, a connection further exploited by the New Order offering access to Doom's beta, bringing us neatly onto what the general impression of the new Doom was before its release. Now, history probably won't record a lot of the negativity that surrounded 2016's Doom. It was pretty well known that the fourth Doom game had had a very troubled 8-year development. Originally known, appropriately enough, as Doom 4, the game had at first been pushed as an urban, more military-style shooter, to the point where some had dubbed it Call of Doom. Reaction to this new direction for Doom was almost wholly negative, and eventually the whole thing was torn down and started again. When Doom resurfaced in 2014, it promised a return to what had made the series great in the first place. We're back on Mars, we're going to hell, and we're shooting all the things along the way. Oh, and the game had lost the 4 as well, it's just gonna be called Doom. However, none of the video from the game showed it at its best. It looked like a very basic shooter, and kind of a brown artless mess at that. It looked repetitive in the ways that the original games weren't, just one monster after another getting gibbed forever. Reports from the beta didn't exactly generate much hype either, seeing as it was based around the thing that would eventually become the new Doom's weakest aspect by far, the rather bare bones and outsourced multiplayer. And Bethesda, the new publishers, in what has become their typically controlling style, released no advanced copies of the game for review, usually a huge warning sign that the game itself is a total dog and the publishers applying a bit of damage control. Get as much sales as possible before the rubbish reviews start pouring in, and then get the hell out of there. Even the cover art was seen as a terrible sign. A small thing perhaps, but Doom 1 and 2 had some of the most iconic cover art ever seen in a game. This game, well, it didn't. In fact, it could have been the cover of almost any also-ran FPS released in the past decade. The new Doom did not, in any way, look like it was going to be a great game. Hell, it didn't even look like it was going to be good. I was pretty much nonplussed by everything I'd seen, set to pretty much ignore its release and just stick with the old games instead. And then, of course, all of this turned out to be wrong. Doom represents a very new approach to the FPS, although one that still has a lot in common with its forefathers. Story is pretty minimal, although it is there. Cover, most importantly, is non-existent. There is virtually nowhere to hide from enemies. There's a lot of platforming once again. And there's no regenerating health as such, although health is tackled in a very fun way. And like old Doom, there's plenty of secrets to find in levels if you go looking for them. A lot of the big modern touches in Doom are ones like that have survived over the years, or the addition of miniature challenges, say killing 3 guys with 1 shot that fit the style of the game pretty well, or upgrading your marine, although usually the options here are only designed to assist with the slaughter. And well, the slaughter is where the game is strongest. This game is an incredible evolution of how Doom plays. The best gunfights in Doom were always so physical. Sometimes you had a bit of cover to rely on, which could be useful when dealing with the game's hit scan enemies. But a proper fight with little cover is all about dodging, sidestepping, circle strafing, running, all the while causing as much damage as you can, using cover sometimes but only to get the drop on an enemy, not to hide away, because if you stay in cover for too long, they're just going to come after you. New Doom, a game that does away with cover almost completely, ups the ante even further. You simply have to go on a rampage, running around, dodging enemies, taking hits to give hits, stick and move, rip and tear. It's the only way. And it is brilliant. I'm not sure if I can think of another shooter that gives you such a good feeling through most of its fights, simply because you're basically never standing still. Indeed, if you are standing still, then you're in trouble. A big part of this is the new glory kill system, the greatness of which can be hard to explain because it doesn't look all that good when you're watching it. The core of it is that when an enemy is stunned or near death, they flash and you can quickly execute them. A very short scene plays where you, say, punch their head off, break their neck, tear their arm off and bludgeon them with it, and so on. It's something that can be found and was undoubtedly inspired by Brutal Doom, although you can also trace it to other games. Executing everyone you can is a big part of Ninja Gaiden, for example. It doesn't look great in motion for various reasons. When watching it, you wonder if it slows the game down, or if it takes the player out of the game, or maybe you think that the constant executions become repetitive and so on. But when playing, you just absolutely get it. Glory kills are so important as every one of them drops a little bit of health, rewarding risky play even further. When you're playing on the higher difficulties, they are essential. One thing I love about these glory kills is that they make melee attacks so important. They're great for parrying imps, or just instantly glory killing basic zombies. They're pretty much only there to be glory kill fodder in the first place, but it's so much easier, and a lot more fun, if you simply run up to them and whack them instead of trying to shoot them first. The glory kills just work totally. All of this helps to make the gameplay pretty damn great, as there's simply nothing like a fight in this game. And once you play it, you absolutely get it, this cocktail of constant movement, always dealing with enemies in so many different ways as the play gets harder. It's unreal. But there's plenty more goodness here. It may well be the most refreshing first-person shooter in years, but there's more to that than just gameplay. There's the presentation too. Doom's world is gorgeous, with colours so vivid that you're afraid the game will burn itself into your TV screen forever. The external parts are that damn red, and the insides of the UAC labs are suitably dank, with the fantastic lighting you come to expect from a Doom game. And that's all before you get to hell itself. It's a striking game visually, and it moves great too. It seems like no matter what you play this game on, it just moves without even the slightest hitch. But as good as the graphics are, the sound is something else. Sound, again, was always a very important part of the original Doom. Sure, it was just a few low quality sampled effects, but they were always playing, and they made you feel like you were at some sort of feast. As long as they were playing, you knew that a monster was close by. Not knowing where they were made things even worse. And then the sound of a monster noticing you makes things even worse than that. You always have to be listening out in Doom. If the first time you become aware of a monster is when they start firing at you, then you're screwed. As in most areas, the new Doom takes what worked before and ups things considerably. What was once a few low quality samples now becomes a multi-layered cluster of moans, screams and guttural cries, but both are effective for the same reason, and there's enough going on in the sound alone to ensure that you just can't rest easy even for a split second. I also like the occasional callbacks, the subtle sounds such as doors opening and closing that are very familiar, but not so overdone as to be obvious. The music itself does a job too. While there's no song that's ever going to stick in the mind in the same way that the best of Bobby Prince's music does, it's more dynamic. It's always adding to the tension in the quiet moments, before simply exploding in the fights, smashing you about the face with these djenty industrial blast beats. A great soundtrack to all the carnage that's going on that really helps the game get a rhythm going. It may not be something that you can hum, but it sure is something memorable. Now, all of these things are brilliant technical things. The way the gameplay builds on what worked before to make something new, the graphical beauty, the level and the sound design, and how it all comes together to make a great single player game. Having played it properly, I'm happy to say that it quite obviously wiped out my default choice of FIFA as my game of the year. And I'm hardly alone. When the game hit, word of mouth spread pretty quickly about just how good it actually was. It ended up being a big hit, nominated for plenty of awards and getting several Game of the Year nods. It's unquestionably a big success. But how special is it? As brilliant as it is technically, as successful as it's been, the hardest question for me is simple. Does it deserve to be mentioned in the same breath as Doom 1 and 2? Bearing in mind how special those games are to me, and how I don't think any other first-person shooter since has managed to offer what those games did. Not that others didn't succeed just as much for different reasons, but the Doom mix is special. Is the new Doom up there? I struggled with that question, and the hype machine that built around it only made it tougher to answer. But on playing it properly, I've got to say that the answer is, indeed, yes, it does deserve to be up there. But still, why though? It's difficult to pin the moment down when New Doom became something on the level of the old games to me, and it can feel somewhat arbitrary. Was there really something about that one mob, that one gore nest? The 221st glory kill just felt that much better than the 220th? There's also the odd moment that feels iconic, right down to the Marine punching the crap out of a monitor as a bad guy gives a very typical "we can be friends" spiel in the beginning of the game. An awesome statement of intent and a definite harbinger of things to come, but after everything I've talked about, it would be quite silly to give that honour to a cutscene. In the end, some fights are better than others. Like a desperate rush backwards down the stairs while a Hell Knight's charging towards you, something that shows just how good the design of the game is. You may have literally just walked into this area, a place that you've never seen before in your life, and suddenly in it you're fighting this demonic bastard, and you just know where to go. The fight against two of these at the end of the third level is another keeper. A big arena, constantly moving, plenty of running interference, and again you just know. You just keep running, you react and you adapt constantly, and so many fights in the game give you this feeling. But the one that really clinched it for me came at the end of the fourth level, your second encounter with a summoner. Summoners speed around arenas, shoot fire and naturally lay summon reinforcements. Basically they're the game's version of an Archvile, one of Old Doom's most feared enemies. I kind of cheesed my first encounter with one of them, getting lucky with a couple of launcher shots and dispatching it in pretty short order. But in the second encounter I'm not so lucky, and it's all down to me and him. He's fast and painful, punishing any misstep with a stream of flame that's very hard to dodge. Just like the old days, it's stick and move, the scantest moments spent in cover before I try to track him again, but I can't get all that much damage, and soon I'm all the way down to 1 unit of health before eventually, maybe even slightly luckily, I zig past the fire, hit an explosive shot, and rush the dazed summoner just in time for the most satisfying and most glorious of kills. That, in a nutshell, is the Doom I know. Not just the Doom that I experience whenever I revisit the game, but the Doom that I see in my mind's eye whenever I think about how good the game is. The megamix of all the best things about the game rolled into one that makes me grin like a Marine with a BFG 9000. And this new Doom managed to capture that feel perfectly. And in the end, how does it feel to realise that 24 years after that first trip to hell, Doom is once again right at the very top of the tree? It's pretty amazing to think that not only is it once again the king of single-player FPS games, but that the ground was even set for it just a little by a Wolfenstein game. And that again, it may not have been the first to do all of the things it does, whether it's bringing back arenas or having lots of platforming or reveling in glory kills or whatever, but just like Doom, it was the best combination. History certainly has a habit of repeating itself. Still, coincidences like this don't matter too much when the game is this good. And hey, sometimes ripping everything apart and starting again is a good thing, believe it or not. Because who on earth would have wanted to play the urban military style Doom that he'd originally envisioned? For now, Doom is, once again, the best. Sometime down the line, maybe sooner than you think, maybe a few years from now, it'll be back again. Expectations may vary. Trailers may be poor. Betas may be disappointing. Front covers may be rubbish, but it still can't ever really be counted out, because with Doom, anything is possible. Bye for now. Thanks for watching this video. Maybe you'd like to watch another. And if you really like the stuff, then maybe you could subscribe to the channel, or even support me on Patreon. You could join the list of the great and the good here. Anyway, thank you for watching, and whoever you are, whoever you be, have a good one, take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.